Hi everyone, it's Trevor G. Blake from trevorgblake.com, and this YouTube video is about mentality control during lockdown. I was asked to do a video on this because we get at trevorgblake.com, we get so many people asking for advice about how, because they've found themselves in different circumstances. Circumstances no one has experienced before, most people haven't experienced before, pandemic circumstances, and the government telling you that you are now restricted, your freedom's been taken away. And I know there are a lot of people on YouTube and writing books and giving speeches about ways to cope with mentality lockdown, and that's all fine and dandy. But I have a little issue with a lot of it. And my issue is that most people who are giving the advice are not in the circumstances of the people who are asking for the advice. Now, if you had a problem with your relationship and you went to a marriage guidance counsellor, and the marriage guidance counsellor had 3 marriages and 6 children by those marriages, and the children were so screwed up that they were also in therapy, you might say that that person has some advice to give because they have the experience of the same circumstances that you and your partner are going through. If I was the marriage guidance counsellor and you came to me with a marriage that's screwed up, I'd have to say, well, I'm sorry, I had a fantastic 40-year marriage and never had any issues. It doesn't make me a good marriage guidance counsellor, the fact that I had one good relationship. And so with mentality lockdown, all these people giving advice about how to control your mentality are probably not living in an apartment in downtown with windows that don't open to give fresh air and no garden to walk around in, or having to live with 3 families in a 2-room house, or any of those things. My mother-in-law lived with me for 3 years in a 13,000 square foot house on 5 acres, and I found that claustrophobic, and I required mentality control through that whole 3 years because it was a change in circumstances. But that doesn't qualify me to talk about mentality control during lockdown. So I'm a little reluctant to do it, and so I'm thinking, okay, I've been asked, and I do like a challenge, so what can I talk about? When I decided, well, you know what, let me talk about my parents, because it does get under my skin a little bit when I hear people talk about their challenges of lockdown. And I overheard 2 California women the other day talking about it, and one was saying how awful it has been not to be able to get regular Botox. And the other one was saying how awkward it had been. I can't remember what her thing was, but it was something that was totally material and irrelevant in my opinion, but that made me judgmental. And my natural reaction would be, if I'd been invited to the conversation, would have been to say, oh, come on, pull yourselves together. This is hardly difficult, is it? But that's because I come from a different set of circumstances. And mentality control is not about what you think. It's about how you react to what you think. And so because I've learned long enough with teaching the transformation experience, and also my book, 3 Simple Steps, I've learned over all of that time that positive thinking is an illusion because our thoughts happen in 500 milliseconds. So we don't have time to think positively about it. We hear a situation like that and we go, for goodness sake, get real. But then we catch ourselves about to say that and we choose to react differently. That's mentality control. It's got nothing to do with thinking positively. It's got nothing to do with feeling guilty because you're feeling unhappy. It's all about recognizing the thoughts that you're having, the reaction you're about to do, which might not be in everyone's best interest, including yours, and just reacting differently. That's mentality control. But I don't really have anything in my life that today justifies me giving advice on mentality control. So I have to go back into my history, and I go back even further, and I go back to my parents' experience through the Second World War in Liverpool and the Liverpool Blitz. And I've heard every story that they could possibly drag up over the years about their experience in the Second World War, but I still can't possibly imagine how terrifying and incredible that was. As an example, my father, 12 years old, was required by the government to evacuate Liverpool. Sometimes it was given, in the early days it was given as advice. We suggest that boys over the age of 12 evacuate for their safety. And then as the war got longer and longer, it became mandatory. Boys over 12 years old must leave the cities, because the government didn't want bombs dropping on their heads. Because as the war got on and more soldiers were killed, more forces members were killed, you run out of people to be killed, and it's hard to win a war without people to be killed. And so they wanted a second army, at least, maybe a third army. And it's hard to imagine that your government would give that advice or lie to you. But then we've just gone through COVID. So many of you now understand the conflict of governments that don't really know what they're doing, but are trying to make the right decisions for the future of the country that they believe in, the tribalistic nature of the way we live, that this advice comes about. So there's my father, 12 years old, living with his parents, an only child, all that he's ever known, in Liverpool, the only place he's ever been. And suddenly he's evacuated to what could have been another country, 100 miles away in the middle of nowhere, to a stranger's family, having to abide by strangers' rules with other strange boys from other cities that this family had very kindly, because the government offered them financial incentives as well, I shouldn't say, but also kindly opened their doors to and brought in. But then he was required to pay for his accommodation, so he had to work on the farm. You know, if he had access to the internet in the 40s, he might have sent me an email saying, I need help with mentality control for this situation of evacuation. And I'd say the same thing. Sorry, I don't understand because I haven't had to go through that set of circumstances. But it's not what you think, it's about how you react to what you think. And that's really all there is to it. And he must have known that intuitively, because later years, he would talk about his time with that family in that country as the best in his life. And he stayed in touch with the owners of that farm until they died. And he loved that countryside so much that the first chance he got to move back to it, he did. Now, the opposite happened because he'd left the parents who loved him and he loved them, but he was gone for 6-7 years. And when he came back, they were strangers. And so we always had relationship issues with his parents after that, because he didn't really know them. 12 to 18, those are the formative years. And then he went off to do his time in the Air Force. So he was gone another 3 years after that. So he really never knew his parents as an only child. I think today a lot of people, if they went through that, especially, you know, in sort of well-to-do countries like America and European countries or Western European countries, I think a lot of us would be seeking mental health help for, you know, assistance in that situation. But it didn't exist back then. And he just got on with it. And he was able to somehow intuitively change his mentality to cope with the changing circumstances and to react differently than he could have chosen to react if he'd decided to rebel against it, run away or something like that. Well, he didn't do those things. Listening to those stories, I think, really helped me understand the power of mentality control, in that it's not what we think, but how we react to what we think. I'm sure there were times when he cried himself to sleep at night, but he managed to find a way over it. And then I think of my mother's situation. They didn't know each other then, of course. She was only 13. Her brother was 8. Her parents were advised by the government to dig a hole at the bottom of the garden and lay corrugated iron across the top, and this would serve as a air raid shelter to protect them from falling bombs. After the opening up of the Secrets Acts, 25, 50 and 75 years later, we know now that that was a very deliberate attempt by the government to avoid the costs and trauma and the effect on the country's morale of seeing bodies being carted away. Because if a bomb fell on the air raid shelter, there you lay. All you had to do was fill it in. So basically you were digging your own grave, just in case. And so they all lay there shivering, terrified, underneath this corrugated iron, listening to bombs fall all around them, and then waking up the next morning, checking if their house had survived, which one time it hadn't. It had been hit and was razed to the ground, but they survived. And I can't possibly imagine the mentality control required to deal with that circumstance. And so that's why I say I can't imagine the mentality control needed to deal with living in an apartment in downtown, you know, with 10 kids and 3 dogs running around for almost 2 years. But all I can say is that the same mentality control that my parents were able to intuitively find within themselves exists in you too. We have a choice. We have a choice to lash out. We have a choice to think negatively. And we have no choice in positive thinking. It can't exist because thoughts happen within 500 milliseconds. So you can't get in front of them fast enough to change them. And therefore you can't stop your negative thoughts. So you can't stop it if if you feel like the walls are closing in on you and the kids are screaming all the time and fighting, and you now at this point you get a negative thought and you just want to scream, shut up. That's fine. That's normal. That's a stress reaction. That's perfectly acceptable. You can't be one of these people that says, oh, isn't that a lovely sound? Aren't the kids playing happily? That doesn't happen in real life. That just happens in silly movies and silly books and with silly self-help gurus. But what you can do is catch yourself just about to shout, just about to say something. And you think, hang on, I'll think of a different reaction. And that's as simple as it is. And that's all you have to do. So in my somewhat lucky bubble of a world, in the transformation experience, I try to put myself in these situations where we find difficulty, and people help me with that because people come to the transformation experience from all kinds of situations. And so the most common questions I get probably are for mentality control with relationships, mentality control for work, and mentality control for finance. Bombs aren't falling on people's heads that I know of. But the same mentality control works in those situations. And I think those situations are more like the difficulty of our circumstances changing and evolving from suddenly being free to the government figuring things out as they go along, but worried that the healthcare system is going to get overwhelmed. And so in reacting to that, lock down everybody, but give them the impression that it's in their best interests because they won't spread the virus. There's nothing wrong with that. Somebody has to do something. Somebody has to make a decision. We might not like it. We might not agree with it. But we can with good mentality control react to it in a way that's to our benefit and not detrimental to us. And so when I talk about mentality control and transformation experience as far as relationships, we talk about how to stop being against being alone and feeling lonely or being angry with the previous relationship, and how we shoot all that up, and then how we create this being for what we want. And so we're for now an inspiring partner who makes us want to be the best version of ourselves. All sounds very new age, right? But the tools and techniques work beautifully, and the responses to them are great. And we do the same with the business situation, and we do the same with the financial situation. How to stop being against debt and be for financial independence. That's what the tools and techniques get you to. There's quite a bit of work to be done. The transformation experience is based on very simple physics principles, but it's not easy. It takes effort, it takes discipline. And I'm sure it takes the same effort and discipline that my mother's parents and my father's foster parents, I don't know what you would call them, but my father's evacuation parents probably had to find a way to create in order to deal with their circumstances. So for me, although it can come over as arrogant because I'm somebody that lives in a very nice life, in a very good set of circumstances. It wasn't always that way. I grew up poor. We were evicted 3 times. I'm a cancer survivor. My wife died a year ago after a 40-year marriage. I mean, those are all my versions of how do I change my mentality from one set of circumstances to another set of circumstances. And in all of that, it's exactly the same tools as in the relationships and the business. And to be honest, in COVID lockdown, they're all the same tools. It's just your set of circumstances. Your situation will be unique to you, but the tools will work regardless of your set of circumstances. That's my guarantee. So let's just remind ourselves what mentality control is all about. It's not about positive thinking. It's about positive reaction. Because we naturally have a thought and an emotion, and that leads to an almost immediate reaction. Sometimes that's a good thing. If you're in the water and you see a white shark heading towards you, it's pretty good to have a thought and an immediate and an emotion and an immediate reaction. That's going to help you. So it's not always a bad thing. But, if you're in lockdown and you have all of this stuff going on around you and you feel stressed and you're working at home for the first time and you're not quite sure how to do it or what you're doing, and it starts to build up and you feel it's unfair because you're in one set of circumstances where you're happy and now you're in another set of circumstances where it's all gone pear-shaped, mentality control is what helps you deal with all of that. And once you start dealing with it with mentality control and you start reacting differently and you find new ways to deal with each situation, you find that your whole circumstances in life change. I did see it in lockdown from my beautiful, rosy-coloured spectacles, La Vie en Rose that I was living at, during the first year of lockdown. I did, I could, before lockdown, I could go for a walk and I'd be on my own. I could walk 10 miles and not see another soul. During lockdown, after a period of time, which I think would be the time when mentality control probably came into play, I finally saw families on their bikes and families walking again, and people walking dogs appropriately instead of just letting them in the back garden, and people doing different things because they'd found a new way to cope. They found a new mentality approach. This is what mentality control does it. So they'd stopped reacting negatively to circumstances and they'd found a way to react positively, just like my parents did during the Second World War. So that's my take on mentality control in lockdown. I'm not sure that it's very much help to any of you because all of your circumstances are individual. All I can tell you is that if you feel you need help, for goodness sake, go to trevorgblake.com. You'll find a lot of tools and techniques. There's a lot of articles. They're free. You don't have to do anything. You can sign up for my email articles, my Monday morning mentalities, which talks about a lot of this stuff. So a lot of it is just there, available and free to you. There's a practical magic of the 5-hour workday, which will help any of you who are working from home for the first time. That's a free download, no strings attached. I think you'll get addicted to the better life. This is what I predict. You'll get addicted to the potential to create the life of your dreams that you want to come and have the transformation experience. And that's obviously why I do these YouTube videos. I make no bones about the matter. People ask me questions. I'm happy to give answers. I hope my answers are helpful. But I want everyone to have the transformation experience because I had the experience of seeing how it affected my parents. I've had the experience of seeing how it got me out of poverty. I've had the experience of seeing how I could be a cancer survivor having been given 6 months to live. I can see how it's given me the experience of building and selling 3 multi-million-dollar companies. And I currently have 3 that I run at the same time. And I've seen how it's helped me go from not knowing how to start a book to having, several bestsellers. But that's in my bubble. So in your circumstances, the tools and techniques will help you get out of whatever version of quicksand you feel you're in. And it might be just that you feel really stuck in quicksand being in a lockdown situation. And so you get out of that lockdown situation and then you realize that this stuff works and the same tools can get you from any set of circumstances to any other set of circumstances. The only thing that limits that journey is how big you want to think. So I hope that's helpful. Once again, I'm trevorgblake.com or trevorgblake@trevorgblake.com. And if you like this topic and think it's worth a debate, please hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up, and then other people will get... There's probably millions of people out there that need help or think they need help with mentality control in lockdown. And you can help change their circumstances by just subscribing and hitting the thumbs up. And for that, I thank you.